مردم شریف ایران، من شهریار افشار هستم، میزبان شما در Politics 365. امروز آقای گیبریل نورونیا به برنامه پیوسته. آقای نورونیا این نماینده مؤسسه غیرانتفاعی هستند در واشنگتن دی سی به اسم Polaris National Security. به علاوه اون ایشون چندین سال سابقه دارن در ادمنستریشن پرزیدنت ترامپ. Also organizationی به اسم Forum for American Leadership and also the Jewish Institute for National Security of America. چندین سال در این زمینه فعالیت کردن و مخصوصاً یکی از مشاورای وزارت خارجه بودن در ادمنستریشن آقای ترامپ در مورد ایران. بقیه برنامه به انگلیسی پخش میشه. Gabriel, welcome. Thanks so much for making time. Such a fascinating background. I'm jealous. You've been, involved with so many Iran conversations. I like to say you were in the room when it happened. That knowledge is unique. And of course, now you're working with Polaris. Tell us a little bit about kind of your Iranian experience in the previous administration, and then, of course, your role with Polaris.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. My background was in China and Russia policy. I was in the Senate for 4 years, and I'd always said I would never work on Middle East issues. And then one day I was offered a job doing Iran at the State Department, and I said, actually, I'll change my mind. I'll do this. This looks interesting. And so I got to work for Secretary Pompeo and Brian Hook and Elliot Abrams, who were the special representatives for Iran. So I ran the communications in both English and Farsi, as well as the congressional relations, human rights policy, and a lot of the sanctions and nuclear policy. So I got to do a little bit of everything. Didn't sleep much for 2019 and 2020 when things were really getting heated up between the United States and Iran. And since then, I've been on the outside running a couple think tanks, and now I work at a third one, JINSA, as a research fellow, where I do sort of my Iran-focused work. But Polaris is an organization I founded with Morgan Ortegas, who is the State Department spokesperson. We started it a couple months after the end of the Trump administration. And it was really designed to go to the American people and explain a lot of what we had done in the Trump administration, the progress we had made with the Abraham Accords, with maximum pressure, with our pressure on the People's Republic of China, and bring really foreign policy to everyday folks in a way they could understand what we did and what we needed to do to try to retain American supremacy around the world.
That's amazing. Like I said, I'm jealous that you got a crash course. I'm sure there was a lot of resources around you to help you understand the uniqueness and really the separation of the Islamic Republic from the peace-loving people of Iran. And this has always been one of our frustrations as people in the diaspora, that sometimes the mainstream media groups everybody together. So I'm sure in your crash course, you quickly became aware of all the different voices and the diversity of the community. Did you notice that at all as you were going?
One of the very first things I always heard right when I got into the State Department was this emphasis that the number one thing that American Iranians cared about was that we differentiate between the regime itself, the Islamic Republic, and the Iranian people. And the thing that we noticed looking at social media in Iran and looking at what people were saying was they loved America. And they have this deep yearning to come and visit America, to be part of it, to be friends with it, mass consumption of American culture. And then the regime itself, which was this, twisted Islamic government form imposed on the people. And they live on enmity, and their whole rise and demise is this endless antagonism with the West, their desire to destroy America, to destroy Israel, and that it really just didn't represent the Iranian people. And so we did a lot of effort to reach out to the Iranian people themselves and say, we understand that you guys are the longest suffering victims of the Islamic Republic. The rest of the people in the Middle East and the United States also suffer from this regime, but it's the Iranian people back home who have to suffer from the oppression of the regime, from the way they've destroyed everything from water systems, the environment in Iran, completely stolen billions and billions of dollars worth of the regime of the country's natural resources. And that's really that we're on the same page and same team as the Iranian people was an important message. And I think the Iranian people heard that and appreciated that. I remember even in 2020, the regime would routinely put out American flags in the streets trying to get Iranian people to step on them. And we would see Iranian people going far out of their way so they wouldn't have to step on the American flag. And I think that showed a lot.
Right. Thank you. I mean, thank you for noticing that. I often don't see that in mainstream media because it's just quick and easy to say Iran and then you lump everybody together. Even when CNN, sadly and greatly disappointing, when they were in Iran a few weeks ago, they would only interview government-sponsored spokespeople that the government made. I mean, it was so clear. It was not even, I'm shocked that after all these years, and mainstream media would not make an effort to try to reach out to ordinary Iranians. They only would speak to these spokespeople that conveniently are in the crowd, as if it's, I mean, the whole thing is a facade. The regime probably enjoys American culture just as much as anybody else, but they are made up this story and they've stuck to it for 45 years. They've successfully oppressed the people of Iran. So tell us a little bit about your work with Polaris and what you do, especially with interacting with Congress and some of the policy positions you've taken.
Sure. So I'm the executive director of Polaris. So I do a little bit of everything. I do fundraising, policy, messaging, legal, a little bit of everything under the sun. So we work a lot with Congress, especially on Middle East policy. I think our biggest effort that we spent in 21 and 2022 was killing the effort to return to the Iran deal. And so I've testified before Congress 4 times. I've written tons of reports which they have cited in their letters and legislation. I'm really proud of having helped Congress pass quite a bit of legislation in the last year that puts pressure on the regime, that forces the Biden administration to actually act, especially about oil sanctions on the regime. Oil is the lifeblood of the Islamic Republic. That's where they fund terror. The money doesn't go to the Iranian people. It actually goes in special bank accounts directly to the regime. And so a lot of this was, again, I had seen from the inside what happened, what was happening there. And Polaris is really about bridging that, of the policy practitioners speaking to Congress, speaking to the legislators and helping them figure out what to do, what to legislate, and also how to speak to the Iranian people, how to speak to the American public. Again, not just Iran, but also Russia policy, Ukraine policy, China, Taiwan policy, Israel policy. What we've seen, and I think what the American public has realized over the last few years, is this is one axis. In World War II, we had the axis of Germany and Japan and briefly the Soviet Union. Today, the axis is Russia, Communist China, North Korea, and the Islamic Republic in Iran.
Undeniably, undeniably. I mean, these countries are colluded to kind of disrupt the world order and promote autocracy. And so I'm glad there are organizations like yourself trying to bring light into that. If Donald Trump gets elected again, what do you feel his policy towards Iran will be?
So I think what you'll see is a return to maximum pressure if he gets elected, and then an emphasis on number one, that the Islamic Republic will never be allowed to get a nuclear weapon. Now, this was the position and has been the position of the last 5 presidents of the United States. We are in a situation today which is very precarious. When we reimposed maximum pressure in 2018, we were able to completely stomp the Iranian economy. They weren't able to fund terrorism. Their oil sales were down to 300,000 barrels a day. I think it's important for everyone to understand it's going to be a lot harder to impose maximum pressure. I don't think the Iranian regime has any interest in any negotiated settlement at this point. Although I think, as everyone knows, President Trump loves a deal. He loves the idea of being able to do deal making. And what his position in 2018, 2019 was very clear. It was, if the Iranians want to talk, we are happy to talk to the government and try to work out a deal. But it would not be a deal like the JCPOA. It would not be something which allowed them to fund and sponsor terrorism that would pave their pathway to a nuclear weapon. And so I think what you'll see is maximum pressure on the regime and maximum support for the Iranian people. And that combination is going to be powerful, but there's also going to be the threat of military force if the Iranian regime wants to get a weapon.
So It could happen, right? Trump could get elected again, and despite his personal flaws, I believe a lot of Iranian Americans support his Iran policy, right? So that may come to fruition. The Iran deal is dead. A lot of people were against it. I think a lot of people were against it before, but briefly, Iran showed some promise when it was originally introduced, but now it's just quite the opposite. I mean, like you say, there's no deal. So if you look forward to some kind of a engagement towards a solution, whatever it is, because there's a lot of Iranians that are suffering as we speak, and it's really hard. I mean, being American is difficult. Being Iranian American is very difficult because you're having to watch your countrymen and women suffer when we enjoy such freedoms in this country. And it's just so hard to watch. So it's good, and I think it's very gratifying to hear there are people in Washington that understand the Iranian people at large, and they're taking efforts to educate policymakers towards making change towards a better future. Um, what if, just for a moment, what if Biden gets elected? I mean, how will your policies change?
Well, I think what we've seen is in the first 3.5 years of the Biden administration, a realization that their policy they had to start was a complete failure. I talked to a lot of Biden administration officials, some of the diplomats. There is a recognition that the policy they had under Rob Malley didn't work. It was a failure. It was intellectually conceded to begin with, and that it should never have been implemented in advance in the first place. What we have started to see is some positive movements. Their policy is a little bit better, but it is still plagued by this, what I like to call their defeatist mentality that is always reacting to what the Iranian government does rather than putting the regime in conundrums and putting the pressure and forcing the regime to act in a certain way. That I think would continue into a second administration. I think what you will see is you'll see them starting to do more oil enforcement, but they're not going to get them down to the levels of oil exports that we had them down in the Trump administration. Mostly because they want a certain level of Iranian oil exports so that the oil market doesn't jump. The difference, what you would see between the Trump and the Biden administration, is the Trump administration would say, look, we'd much rather pump that oil domestically and serve the global markets in US domestic oil production rather than relying on Venezuelan oil, Russian oil, Iranian oil, because those oil sales fund terrorism across the globe. So again, I think they are doing a little bit better this year than they have been in the first 2 years, but that was a low barrier. And I still think the Trump administration approach would do a lot more to pressure and weaken the regime and create better outcomes for both the Iranian people as well as American national security.
How has your message been received by Congress? I mean, are there certain leaders that we should look for in Congress? In either party, I don't know if it's predominant Republican, but Democrats. I mean, who is receptive to your message?
Look, what I would say is Iran policy does not need to be partisan, and before 2014, it wasn't partisan. The JCPOA, really rent the two parties apart for about 6 years, 7 years. What we've seen in the last few years is huge numbers of Democrats come and say, we realize that this policy was a mistake. We need huge pressure on the regime. And so they've joined, there's a number of House members, especially, who have joined Republicans in writing letters to the president asking for more pressure. So I think on the House side, the leaders on the Democrat side are folks like Jared Moskowitz, folks like Joe Wilson, Mike McCall on the House side, Jim Banks especially. On the Senate side, we haven't seen that leadership from the Democrats. The one person who was doing that was Robert Menendez, who's now under severe legal scrutiny, and Joe Manchin, to a degree, who is retiring at the end of this year. So on the Republican side in the Senate, it's really guys like Bill Hagerty, who's the senator from Tennessee, still Tom Cotton from Arkansas, Ted Cruz from Texas, who have been the real leaders there. And there really hasn't been a lot of people on the Democrat side stepping up. The House side, there's a lot of House Democrats saying, we want to be part of a bipartisan solution that puts conundrums faces on the Islamic Republic. And that's been really good. I hope that one thing that we're going to see in the next few years is a return to a bipartisan policymaking on Iran, where we, don't have to make accusations against each other, and we can say, much like what we've done on China policies, that we can disagree on the method here and there without believing the other side is doing something fundamentally wrong. And that's what I hope we go back to.
I think that's a good plan. Looking at the world, especially Europe, so much turmoil, a lot of political back and forth. Does this policy have any friends in the European community?
One thing I've heard repeatedly from European diplomats over the last years, they are the ones wanting more pressure on the Islamic Republic. And it's actually the Biden administration who keeps reducing it and curtailing steps to pressure the regime. That is really strange for me to even hear from them at all. Previously, Europeans were always the ones calling for restraint, calling for more diplomacy. And I think what they've realized over the last year is that they've been lied to by the Iranian regime. They don't have any good faith in them anymore. They don't believe that there's a diplomatic solution that's readily available. And so they're willing to do a lot more. That being said, a lot more for Europe is still not that much. In the Middle East, I think, when I was in the State Department, our Arab partners, Israel certainly, were very supportive of the maximum pressure approach we had on Iran. I think over the last few years, what they have seen is they are trying to reduce tensions. They realize that they don't believe the regime's going anywhere anytime soon. They kind of want a measure of stability. They don't want to poke the bear too much. And so they'll go along with pressure, but then they'll sort of go and on the side and go talk to their Iranian diplomat colleagues and try to work something out. And they feel that basically what they're all afraid of is they don't want Iranian missiles landing in their capitals. They don't want their skyscrapers destroyed. They do not want the idea that tourists would all leave and that Western businesses would just pack up because of the threat from the Iranian military. So it's going to be a little bit different, I think, seeing how this goes, even in the next Trump administration.
Right, and just in the last minute, that's exactly the rub. So interesting, you characterized Europeans are the ones saying we should be more aggressive with Iran, which has always been the other way around. They're looking for American leadership, and it's not there, right? There's always this disagreement about what to do about a country the size of Iran. It's not Luxembourg. It's a major. I mean, it's a major. Economic, military, social, cultural power in the world, whatever its ideology is. As some Middle Eastern countries, as you very, very rightly said, they would prefer some stability because instability is very dangerous. The diaspora, the mass, especially the people, they want change. They want to rip the Band-Aid off. They want regime change, end the story. They don't even want an evolution towards democracy. Even in the recent elections that you are witnessing, one of the lowest voter turnouts ever. It's a vote. Obviously, it's a vote of no confidence in the regime. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens. All I can say is, Gabriel, please come back and join us. We'll learn so much from you. You will have a direct pipeline into Southern California, Iranians, and your voice will always be welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.